Good evening to the general public, folks here and on Zoom, and to staff and to commissioners. Good to have you here this evening, and our technical difficulties are, knock on wood, solved for the moment, and we will get the meeting going. Can we start with a roll call, please?
Of course. Commissioner Benson?
Present.
Commissioner Freitas?
Present.
Commissioner Lazar?
Present.
And Commissioner Kraft?
Here.
Thank you.
We have quorum, and so I'd like to ask Commissioner Lazar to give the salute to the flag, please. Well, we'll move right to item C, the approval of minutes. And so I'm willing to hear a motion to accept the minutes of October 10th.
I'll move that we accept them. I'll second.
Motion moved and seconded. Any comments, revisions to the meeting minutes?
Can you just tell me again who seconded?
Kraft.
Michael Kraft. Seeing no additional comments, let's put it to the vote, please. All in favor, say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? None. Abstentions? None. So moved.
Mr. Vice Chair, if you can move a little closer to your microphone, please.
Okay, good. All right, well, let's move to item D, the oral communications. And this is the place where commissioners or the public has the opportunity to address any item that's not on tonight's agenda. So if you'd like to speak to us on on an item not on the agenda, please do so now. And we can't take action on that item, but we can certainly hear it. So let me first open it up to the Planning Commission. Does anybody have any oral communications for us this evening? Okay, let me move it to the general public in the house, in the chambers. Why don't you raise your hand if you're on Zoom and if you would like to make general comments on items not on the agenda. I don't see any hand raises at this moment.
Nope.
So let's move on to public hearings, new. And our first item is the Sorrel Leaf Healing Center. Does staff have a report to give us tonight on that?
I do.
Thank you. Can you tell us your names?
Yeah. Hello, commissioners. My name is Melissa Smith. I'm an assistant planner with the Development Services team, and a new addition. This is my first presentation to the Planning Commission, so thanks for having me. The project before you for your consideration today is the Sorrel Leaf Healing Center Conditional Use Permit and Design Review, which proposes a mental health crisis facility for children ages 7 to 18 within an existing family residence and addition at 124 Indianola Road. There we go. Here's a bird's eye view of where the proposed project is located in the context of city limits. The proposed project site is in the northeast portion of the city, very close to the city's boundary. This is zooming in a bit closer. And zooming in further yet, you'll see that this is a 13.5 acre parcel zoned RS 12,000 with a land use designation of estate residential. It's located off of Indianola Road, south of the Highway 101 corridor, and west of the Indianola Cutoff and Walker Point Road. The parcel directly to the east is also zoned estate or RS 12,000 and is land use designation is estate residential. The parcel to the south is zoned agriculture exclusive. The parcel to the west is an undeveloped parcel zoned coastal agriculture, and the parcels to the north are zoned service commercial and have commercial storage facilities on them. The use that is proposed is classified as a charitable institution, defined as a nonprofit institution devoted to the housing, training, or care of children. This is a conditionally permitted use in the RS 12,000 zone requiring a conditional use permit and design review. The proposed project is located in the coastal zone and requires a coastal development permit. With the majority of the project site located within the California Coastal Commission's retained CDP jurisdiction, a request for permit consolidation was made and accepted to allow for one consolidated CDP to be processed by the Coastal Commission and acted on after local discretionary approvals. An overview of the project. The project proposes, the applicant proposes to create a mental health crisis facility, as stated before, for children ages 7 to 18. The project will include two main mental health programs. The first, the Crisis Stabilization Unit, which is going to provide 24-hour stays, and then the Crisis Residential Treatment Program, which is going to provide stays of up to 30 days. There will be 12 patient rooms total, as well as therapy rooms, and outpatient aftercare will be offered to CRT program, former CRT program participants. The facility will require a total of 24 employees with 13 clinical staff on site at all times. And I think here it is important to note that Eureka and the surrounding area does not currently have a facility that of this nature, and children, along with their caregivers, have to travel out of the area to receive the kind of care that this facility will provide. The property contains an existing 3-story, 4,872 square foot single family residence with an attached carport, as well as one accessory building and a storage shed. The site is served by city water and has a private septic system that is currently located to the east of the residence but will be abandoned. Under the proposed project, the existing residence will be remodeled. The attached carport will be removed and a 2,428 square foot addition constructed in its place. The existing accessory building will be converted to an art and music therapy building. The existing shed will be removed and a 462 square foot yoga and meditation pavilion will be built in its place. A 600 square foot greenhouse and a 1,176 square foot barn will be constructed and consisting of livestock and a native plant garden. Additionally, there'll be 2 fire turnarounds as well as 29 off-street parking spaces. Last, to accommodate the proposed use, the existing septic system, as mentioned before, will be abandoned and replaced with a new septic system installed with the main and reserve leach fields located near the southern end of the property. The biological assessment report identified forested wetlands, herbaceous wetlands, and a freshwater pond. Proposed development will avoid all identified wetlands, with the majority of development concentrated within or immediately adjacent to the current paved footprint and relatively flat, previously disturbed areas of existing yard. The minimum required buffer distance between permitted development and ESHA is 100 feet, and although proposed development will occur within 100 feet of ESHA, site visits were conducted with representatives from the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, as well as the California Coastal Commission. And during these site visits, measures were identified to warrant the buffer reduction and ensure no degradation of ESHA would occur. Additionally, the California Coastal Commission, in their processing of the coastal development permit, will include conditions ensuring the project does not adversely impact the surrounding ESHA. Then on to design review. The existing residence, which was constructed in the late 1930s, is an exaggerated example of colonial revival architecture. The residence is not on the local register of historic places, but the Cultural Resource Field Survey concluded it does have historical significance due to its architectural style. It is important to note when considering design review that this structure is not visible from any of the roadways. Any changes to the building facade will be viewed solely by patients and staff. An architect was enlisted by the applicant to design the house alterations and addition with the goal of finding a balance between the facility's needs and the historical character, making the residence look more inviting and comforting for children and teen patients while still respecting and preserving the historic architectural elements. All right. So as stated before, the existing carport will be removed and a 2,428 square foot addition will be built in its place. The second floor of the existing residence will be remodeled and extending the second floor facade further north to create a glass enclosed second floor observation space, a therapy room, as well as one additional bedroom. With the addition of the first floor entryway, the front porch will be separated into two sections. The existing support columns, which are a formidable piece of the current architecture, will be retained and integrated into the new design, becoming feature elements of the front porch and supporting the said observation room and additional bedroom added to the second floor. An ADA accessible ramp will be added to the east side of the residence, leading up to the entry porch. Additionally, with inspiration from the existing residence, black wrought iron railings have been included in the new design, and brickwork will be done in the same color tone and proportions of the existing brick. Some additional design features of the existing architecture that are being echoed in the new design are the divided light windows, the crown molding, the gutters, horizontal lap siding, and shingle roofing. It's staff conclusion that the proposed development will be harmonious with its surroundings and will have a positive effect on the property value, thus meeting the required findings for design review. It's for all these reasons presented and included in the staff report that staff recommends that the Planning Commission hold a public hearing and adopt a Planning Commission resolution approving with conditions the conditional use permit and the design review. I have a suggested motion on the next slide, and I can bring it up later if needed, so I'll stop screen sharing for the discussion. Available today for questions, either in person or via Zoom, is the founder and executive director of the Sorrel Leaf Healing Center, Evan Buxbaum, as well as the project's principal engineers, Angie Dodd and Praj White, the project architect, Julian Berg, and the lead biologist and botanist, Prairie Moore. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Assistant Planner Smith. We'll give you immediate feedback. You're doing good. This was a very good presentation, and we appreciate all the attachments from NRM and the architects in our packet. Everything's really well presented. Thank you. Now, you can't go any lower than that standard. You've set the mark high. Okay. All right. Well, I would like to open a question period up first for the commissioners to ask the Assistant Planner Smith and or the applicants. So go ahead.
I just have one quick clarifying question. I think as page 9 said that at least during Saturdays and Sundays, the maximum number of clients would be limited to 10, but I wasn't sure if that meant for all days of the week or just for weekends. Do you know what the maximum number of clients on site is planned to be?
So they have 12 patient beds, so that's one thing. But I think when we were talking about the maximum people on site, we're talking about specifically the outpatient care. So during the weekdays, the outpatient care is going to be targeted only in the evenings. So it's like from 5 p.m. until 8 p.m. And I think they had a maximum number of outpatients, it being 6 during the week. And then on the weekends, it's during the daytime hours, and they have a maximum of 10.
Great, yeah, so it seems like a pretty low intensity facility. Thank you.
Yep.
One clarifying question. Spell out ESHA for me.
ESHA,
What does it stand for?
environmentally sensitive habitat areas.
Okay, thank you.
So in your presentation, you mentioned that the structure, while not listed, was determined to be eligible for recognition due to its architectural character. Is that right?
That is what the surveyor determined in their cultural resource report.
Can I ask who performed the cultural resources survey? Was it the same folks that did the archaeological survey?
Yes, it was all in one. I'd have to pull it out to get his name. I think it's
But we don't have them here
What?
tonight.
Will Rich. Yeah.
Okay. So I guess my question is this, that given that there has been a recognition of potential, because something that need not be listed under CEQA to be potentially significant. So how do we have confidence that the changes that Mr. Berg has kind of engineered and as the architect are harmonious with the historical character? Do we have someone with the actual experience to be able to vet that, or are we relying on the architect to make that determination, or is it staff level? How is it that we come to that conclusion?
So it was first the architect's assessment of the changes combined with staff's analysis of what the proposed changes are, with a understanding of what the Secretary of Interior's standards are for rehabilitation. I will note that in the staff report, staff concluded that we could recommend approval of design review, but if for any reason you guys are uncomfortable with that recommendation, you guys do have options in front of you, including requesting that this project be seen by the Historic Preservation Commission and have them offer you either a non-binding recommendation or opinion, or even having it be reviewed by them. It's up to your discretion.
Okay, thanks for the answer to that. I also noted that in the the report done by NRM, and maybe we can wait for Prairie to address this, but the discovery of a bald eagle nest in the vicinity of the project. I didn't see specific mitigation measures. I saw I saw a condition of approval related to construction noise that was somewhat boilerplate, more for human nuisance, not so much for wildlife harassment. And I have a number of other things, but maybe I won't bring them up now. But as far as conditions that seem to be recommended in the biological report, but are not embedded in the conditions attached to the resolution.
Absolutely.
So we can get into those later, I guess. But I'd like to know what you believe the project is designed to do to avoid potential harassment to the bald eagle nesting.
Right. And, we're in kind of a unique situation because almost most of the time, if you guys are seeing a CUP, you guys are also processing the CDP. We're just in this very unique situation where the CDP is falling into the California Coastal Commission's jurisdiction. And so we're processing them separately. And so one of the conditions of this approval is that the applicant has to adhere to any of the conditions set forth by the California Coastal Commission in their approval of the CDP. And we're very confident that the California Coastal Commission will condition a lot of the mitigation measures that you're referencing from the Bio and ESHA report, which is one of the reasons why we didn't specifically condition them here and left them more up to the development permit. Again, asking the applicant to adhere to any condition that the California Coastal Commission set forth. There are mitigation measures identified for the bald eagle's nest, including no exterior construction done during the nesting season, as well as having a, I forget what it's exactly called, like a nesting bird survey done within 7 days of the construction, which again, those are outlined in the bio report, but they're not conditioned with the use permit.
Yeah, so I did notice that. Thanks for confirming. I guess I have some concerns, and I'm interested in Principal Planner Getz and Kenyon. And in terms of, I understand that this isn't the last bite at the apple. The Coastal Commission, through the consolidation process, will ultimately have the final say on what the project looks like after we've taken action. I have a little bit, and I'd be interested in my other commissioners on this, but I have a little bit of concern about abdicating that responsibility under the use permit, under our authority. It is a discretionary action. We do have broad findings we have to make, and why we wouldn't take a stab at it at this juncture seems strange to me. So I get that there's a lot more, maybe it's more germane to a coastal permit to get into those details, but it doesn't seem outside the scope of a use permit, just from my experience. But maybe it's narrow. The findings are so narrow that we really don't have the latitude. Do you guys want to speak to that?
So I think we, as staff, struggled with this one a little bit too. But taking a step back from the project and just looking at what the purpose of the project what the purpose of the permit that we're working on is supposed to cover, it didn't seem to staff like protections of ESHA, setbacks, bald eagles, those kinds of things were necessarily germane to the use permit itself. All of the protections are shown on the plans. We're approving those plans under the use permit. And the other potential issue that we saw was if the city places conditions or mitigation measures on the project that are then different from the ones that the Coastal Commission applies and they conflict, then we put the applicant, number one, in a really bad position. And number two, we would have to figure out how to resolve those conflicts one way or another, which means that they would either have to come back to the Coastal Commission or they would have to come back to us. So that was kind of the thought process that went behind it. We, because the Coastal Commission's action has to be in conformance with our LCP as well as with the Coastal Act, then all of the mitigation measures that are suggested or recommended in the reports that we attach for your information, we believe that those will be taken care of by the commission.
Okay. I think I'll hold off for now until we get into discussion later. So thank you.
Okay, really quick, just to follow up on what Commissioner Lazar was asking about the architectural finding. It sounds like the archaeologist recommended that an architectural historian review the design prior to project implementation. Has that been done?
No, that hasn't been done. That was his recommendation. And since the house is not on the local register of historic places, it's not a required step in our process. And that's why we kind of said that you guys have maybe a couple of options on how you proceed. If you felt that based on the staff report and the analysis therein that that was necessary, then we can move forward. Based on staff analysis, we felt like it did meet the required needs for the design review approval, but you guys could always have it seen by the Historic Preservation Commission.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, I've got a question here, and I don't have questions on any of the submittals or reports from the consultants or the architect, but I do have some questions on the actual resolution. Okay. And my first one is in the second whereas paragraph, number 4, under tribal monitor. And my question is, this is very specific about the tribal monitor will be from the Bear River Band of the Ronerville Rancheria. And my question isn't about the presence of a tribal monitor. I'm just sort of curious why the Bear River Rancheria was specifically targeted as opposed to any of the other 2 rancherias in the area, and that which would be more consistent with the inadvertent discovery protocol, which names all 3.
Yeah.
So I just was sensitive to that. Could you tell us about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So this was sent to referral to all 3 of the tribal entities, and of the 3 TIPOs that responded, one specifically requested that the tribal monitor be from their tribe, from Bear River Band of Ronerville. The other 2 had no opinion, did not need it to specifically come from their tribe. And so with one tribe requesting that it came from their tribe, we said, okay, if only one is required, then it's okay for it to come from Bear River.
And Melissa confirmed with the other 2 that was all right.
Okay, thank you. Good to know. My other question is related to item 7 and item 8. This item 7, construction phase erosion sediment control plan, and item 8, the post-construction stormwater control plan. My understanding of the general construction permit from the State Water Resources Control Board is that even though it says construction phase erosion and sediment control plan, it would still be available as part of the design review, and that post-construction stormwater control plan, stormwater control plan is also something that ought to be reviewed in advance, by us. I'm curious why we're not able to see it. I know there is some language in the general construction permit about being able to submit both erosion sediment control plans and stormwater control plans after the fact, but it seems that in this case, in some cases where some of the BMPs in the actual resolution includes things that might require grading, infiltration galleries and pipes, and some soil disturbance and infiltration trenches and things that seem like that ought to be part of the design at the very front end. And so I'm just curious why we sort of give them a pass to do that till later, as if construction phase means you don't have to do it till you're actually in construction. It means you plan it, you don't have to implement it until construction, is my understanding of it. Do I have this wrong?
I'm going to actually defer to one of the principal planners on this, just based on pure experience with these control plans.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so the construction phase plan is to make sure when they're doing the construction that they're taking care of their stockpiling and dust and stuff like that. And none of that's going to involve ground disturbance separate from the project ground disturbance itself. And they did give us a ground disturbance plan about where the ground disturbance is occurring with the construction. The post-construction, they did give us plans showing how the parking areas are going to, where they're going to have drainage swales, that the parking areas will be graded to direct runoff to those that end at these energy dissipator rock lined areas. So it is on the plans, and they submitted a preliminary stormwater control sheet for our stormwater person to review, but it's not final yet.
Yeah, I didn't see it as part of the submittal for us to review in terms of looking through the plan set. I didn't see a water pollution control plan page. Or
We can include it next time.
Yeah, that would be nice. 'Cause
Yeah.
I'd like to know if, especially when there's wetlands close by, and Isha areas and ponds and the like.
Sure,
I'd like
yeah.
to just be able to follow that. Also, because later tonight we're going to be looking at the LCP and the LAR 1.6 really talks about how important it is to think about that stuff as part of the design rather than an afterthought to the design. Yeah. Okay, thank you. That's my only big question. Why don't we open this now to public comment? Are there anyone present who would like to make comment on the staff presentation?
Evan has
Yeah.
Okay, I see Evan Buxbaum with his hand up. Good evening, Evan Buxbaum. Good to see you, and you have 3 minutes. We need to be able to hear you. You need to unmute yourself.
Do you have the off mute?
We're not hearing you
We're not
quite
muted.
yet, Evan. Maybe it could be on our end, but see what you can do on your end. Can you hear me? Thumbs up if you can hear me. Okay.
Says they can hear him online.
Yep.
So that must mean it's our system.
Uh-uh.
What's it set on? Click on mute. What's it set on?
We'll figure this out in just a minute, Evan. So your 3 minutes won't start till we get to hear you.
Okay. Did you sign on your own?
Mm-hmm.
That may be the problem.
It's never been a problem before.
It was a problem when they changed something. Okay, so can we get him to call in? Possibly?
I don't know if that's gonna fix the problem. We could join planning commission, we can join the Zoom meeting on still have the IT guy on. He's checking from his end.
Do you have the right speaker?
Yes, we have the right speaker selected. Sorry, guys.
You usually have it so together, so you're allowed. We give you a pass every once in a while when it doesn't all fall into place.
This has just started coming up, so.
So Evan, can you hear me? Evan, if you can hear me, if you want to unmute and try. Hang on just a second.
I think she's going to hold her phone up to the mic, and we should be able to hear you.
I have called in. If you can let me in. Okay. So, can I be heard now?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, great. Thank you. I'm sorry about that. Technical difficulties. So,
Yeah, because he's online.
So my name is Evan Buxbaum, pediatrician. Until very recently, I was a pediatrician in Fortuna, California, serving Southern Humboldt. What I found over the last 5 years, 10 years, but especially in the period since COVID, is increasing number of young people with mental health crises. I had one young woman in 2020 who was suicidal. She came to my office. I sent her to the emergency room, and she spent 15 days at the emergency room in a shared room. People coding, people coming in on drugs. She was deeply traumatized by that. And it kind of triggered me to ask, why can't we have a facility here to meet the overwhelming need for beds for crisis stabilization, crisis residential treatment in our state?
Evan, we're hearing you, but if you could be any closer to your mic, it would be helpful.
Okay. Can you hear me? Okay. There's an overwhelming need in our state for crisis residential treatment for young people. The nearest place is 200 miles away. The kids who are sent there handcuffed in a gurney in the back of an ambulance. And once they get there, it's a very med-heavy program designed to sedate kids so that they can send them 200 miles back to Humboldt without any continuity of care, without any involvement of the family. I and a group of other people got together and said something better could be done for our kids. We were very lucky to find this incredible property, really the natural beauty, the wetlands, the pond, the fields, the forest, in this incredible property are part of what drew us to 124 Indianola. Our process, our program is based in therapy in movement, in mindfulness and meditation and presence, in involvement from the very beginning of the families and of the communities that the kids are coming from and returning to. The reason that we need extra parking is because we have 4 rooms so that people can come back and continue after their residential stay to receive the care that they need. This is a vitally needed part of our community's mental health and youth support network, and really appreciate your time and your consideration of this project. It's going to make an incredible difference. It means so much to so many of the kids in our community. Thank you for your time.
You're welcome. Any other members of the public like to speak to this application? Okay, so then I will close public comment and bring it back to the commission. Go ahead, Commissioner Kraft.
Mr. Bucksbaum, I have a question for you, kind of a general operational question relative to the need. What kind of dent do you think you're making for the local need?
Our calculation in deciding how big to make our program is that 12 beds will significantly disimpact the heavy burden of mental health crisis in our community, and then also in the North Coast in general. We're also going to be serving Del Norte, Lake County, northern Mendocino County. Right now, there's about a 4-to-1 ratio of people who need these services, young people who need these services, and available beds in the state. This is why the California Health Facilities Financing Authority set aside a large chunk of money to finance these beds. Their goal was to add 200 beds to the state, and our facility will be 12 of those beds. We expect to be 100% full. If we could build 20 beds, we would, but this is what we're able to do with our grant right now. And at any given moment, there are between 3 and 6 young people in emergency room beds waiting for placement. And we think that with these 12 beds, we're going to be able to significantly disimpact that need.
I appreciate that. Different question, and maybe you're not the best person to answer it, but I'll ask. The kind of truncated construction schedule that we believe you're going to be held to with the bald eagle nest, how do you feel about being able to get the external work done in that window?
I'm probably not the person to ask. As a pediatrician,
okay. We've got a smart person in the room raising his hand.
I don't know that much about construction. I can let Angie or Praj answer that. I will say that I've been through a roller coaster with this eagle nest, because obviously the sacredness of having nesting bald eagles on the property, just the impact that it's going to be for the kids to see those incredible, majestic birds take flight, was my first response. My second response was, of course, oh, that's going to significantly impact construction. But I know that the whole team is fully on board with protecting the nesting season of the bald eagles. I'll leave it to the construction team to answer the logistics of that.
Glad to hear that. Thank you.
I'd like to invite the applicant's consultant to come up and address that question for the commission.
All right. Good evening, commissioners. My name is Praj White, and I'm one of the agents for the applicant here. Just directly answering your question, according to the conditions of approval, it gives us basically from September 1st through February 1st in order to get the heavy construction done and try to dry in the facility prior to the nesting season start in. I am not going to take back that it's Humboldt County and it's challenging to get construction done, and weather dependent that this project will move forward. We're taking the steps to move through here this evening onto the Coastal Commission, beginning our initial steps at risk for the applicant to begin working with your city building department so that we can move that forward. And we're hoping to have our full submittal there somewhere in April to May. And then we would look at being able to bid the project, hopefully bringing on a competent contractor and able to start the construction exactly on August 1st and running through that open season as Evan and the grants and the project have goals to be operating in 2024.
Thank you. I appreciate
Yep.
that.
Mr. White, you can stay. I have another question for you. My understanding is that it takes eagle fledglings about 6 months. They spend in much more time than songbirds do in their nest, and that period, April through October, would be adequate time, and that 150 feet is a reasonable buffer when there are eagles on other projects. Does all that seem true to you?
Yes, and maybe I misquoted the construction permit, but the quiet time on site is going to be from September 1st through February 1st.
February, okay.
And that is the nesting season. The nest itself is actually 880 feet from the main site.
I see. Okay.
And in your documents, there's an exhibit showing the anticipated construction noise of around 70 decibels, dissipating down to around 40. And we're showing that 40 decibel level is well away from where the eagle's nest was identified. So I think I'm answering your question.
Yeah,
It says
thank
yes,
you.
in
You
fact,
gave me
that's
some
very
clarifications.
understanding. There is that window for the fledglings to be there until they do fledge, and we would move forward after that.
Great. Thank you so
And
much.
if you don't mind, I just pick up the question about construction,
Yes.
stormwater management. So our team did walk the site several times with resource agencies, Coastal Commission staff, and CDFW staff. And really, the plan set that you have received indicates features about stormwater management and protection of the resources around the site. And so the specific swales and guidance of drainage and methods to build that were incorporated in the plan so that it could be assured that we were meeting the requirements in order to allow the reduced buffer. And that was on consultation with both CDFW and Coastal Commission staff. In the construction stormwater permit, so we really did think through this. We do have the elements within the project scope. The construction permits, as identified in the staff report, often under the state water board's regulations, that is the contractor's responsibility for managing the site. So once they take over the site, there will be a construction phase stormwater management plan that will probably come through with the building permit package, but it is the responsibility of the contractor who's in charge of the site to manage that. So that has not happened, so hence you don't see that part in the package. And then the second part, post-construction, we've included the details in the site plan that need to be there for the long-term function and operation of this, and we've included those to assure that will be part of the project development.
So you said you have walked the site with Coastal Commission staff and CDFW. Was that together? Were they all in one site visit?
Unfortunately, we had a hard time coordinating everybody, and so we did have Coastal Commission staff and city staff at one time, and then we had another time where we got CDFW and city staff, and I am assured that email communication occurred between the two CDFW members that were on site with us and Coastal Commission staff.
Okay, thank you.
I was on both site visits, so I can attest.
You're the
to
connector here.
Yeah.
Great.
Okay. That's all I have for answering questions. I know Julian would answer your questions about architecture if you're interested in asking him questions. So we'll be here and available if you have any more.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Does the commission have any other questions for staff or applicants?
Yes, Julian, would you like to join us?
I have been anxiously awaiting.
Okay, I'll start with.
Do I need to turn this on or anything? Or it's fine. Oh, okay.
So it sounds like Mr. Rich prepared the survey for cultural resources and historical have you had any conversations with him, or is that kind of a left-hand, right-hand thing with you designing the building and him doing that stuff?
Yes, we've had several conversations with Bill Rich, and Jill McDonald was also part of writing the cultural study.
Yeah, we didn't receive it, so you're.
Oh,
so
okay.
I
Yeah,
wouldn't know.
right.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
What would you say in terms of your your approach to the design? How did you try to reconcile? Because it's definitely changing the front of the building significantly, and so it's, in my mind, intrusive. But that doesn't mean it's incompatible. But how is it that you married it with the existing facade, and what did you do in terms of the design to make that?
Well, that's a good question. So when I first approached the site and saw the house, and the surroundings, I realized what a difficult task I was given. And on top of it, I had Evan and his team with their intense requirements about what they both wanted in the facility for the long haul and how to address the architecture of the house, which they found not to be very welcoming for a teen crisis center, and something that was supposed to be, a comforting and healing place. So hearing all that and having many discussions with them, I got to work and came up with the design you see there. And as an architect and having done lots of projects in the area over 20 years now, I think it's a good bridging of what is there to what the group would like to have. And as you see in the front entry with the change to the entry porch, that's probably the most significant change, by bringing the porch down a bit and doing the divided light glass enclosed rooms. It not only made it more welcoming and more cottagey, but brings in more space that they need to allow the facility to function here. So does that help answer your question? I think another thing we included was new brick steps. There's stone planters and bay windows with true divided lights. We're matching the siding textures that you see on there with the lap siding, hoping to use redwood, that would also match what's there, and using a local material. So yeah.
Okay.
I am familiar with the Secretary of Interior standards, if you do want to talk about that at all. But
yeah, I mean, they often get name dropped, it seems like.
Yeah.
And they don't. I view them as very rigorous and inflexible. I mean, they try to be as flexible as they can, but you start from a position of like preservation, like the Statue of Liberty or something like that. You don't want to mess anything up. So I think in this kind of case, it's not really the right standard, because you got marching orders to try to make this do certain things that it wasn't originally designed to do. I guess the only other thing I guess I'd just ask, because I couldn't divine it from the photos, it was too far out. In terms of standpoint of integrity, are the original wood sash windows all intact, or has there been replacement over the years to where like they're divided light, but they're not actually the wood sash?
it's a bit of a mixed bag. I would say a lot of them are wood sash windows, but many have been replaced, I think, with some double pane. But they did nice replacements.
Right.
I mean, they're authentic wood, with the exception of that carport addition on the side. That's horrendous, but so we're taking that off, in my opinion. Anyway, it's bad. So yeah, we with the new windows, we will be matching the quality, and the true divided light. So no vinyl windows or things like that.
Well, first of all, I want to say I think that your design is delightful and lovely. I'm wondering if Jill or Bill Rich had any comments about how the modifications both to the primary structure and the addition have any effect on changing the character of the original structure. It kind of seems like it's leaning more craftsman now than colonial. And I'm not, sure how much that really is a problem for me. I think it's a good project meeting a need and it's well designed. But was that something that was discussed by the team, and how did you address it, if at all?
Yeah, we did discuss it. I did meet with Jill McDonald personally, and also, with Bill Rich. And Jill was pretty forward to say this is not a good example of colonial architecture, and it's not on the historic registry. It is an important structure in terms of our history and, the Falk family and what they have done. But in terms of her, she's also traveled a lot and seen a lot of, or is very tuned in to historical architecture, and she did not think this is a prime example of colonial architecture. So that was her take. I will point out that it's not visible from any public way. You really have to go up that road and see it. So not that should be a major factor in how we address historical structures, but it is tucked away a bit. So, and my goal was really, to make Evan and his team happy with the design. And when they saw it, they were absolutely floored. They loved it. So, I think it goes a long way into how it's going to function for them in the future.
Great, thank you.
All right. Any other questions for Julian while he's there, commissioners? I'd like to ask Mr. Prajwhite to come back. I have one more question for you.
Excellent.
I heard in the staff report that the leach field is being moved to the south, and if I'm orienting the site correctly, that would put the leach field closer to the pond than it used to be on the other side of the house where the parking lot's going to go, and now is it moving down to the south?
I read the staff report and I had that same directional concern, and I pulled myself back to the parcel. And I think when we talk about north and south of the structure, so really standing there, I feel like what we're really saying is it feels more east and we're moving it further away from the pond. Okay. So this is part of the Eureka Basin, which is a detailed area for on-site wastewater treatment area. We conducted several studies on site. In this case, we had to meet with staff from DEH because it's within the Eureka plain, and you give notice so that during our site suitability investigations, we had Adam and other staff come out from DEH. We worked with that solution and determined the perk rates. We looked at the soil textural analysis, and we came up with a solution that is fitting for the size of the project and the availability of adequate soils and location on the site. We met with DEH again recently during the referral process and went through, and even though there is no reason to determine or believe that anything needs further study because there was no groundwater found and the soils were not high plasticity, to assure the function, because we had a really dry year before last, they asked that we would put in groundwater monitoring and verify wet weather perk rates as an assurity to the system. And if ultimately, if anything were to come up, we'd expand the system slightly. But really, we've been in conjunction with everybody, and it is not getting closer to the pond. It's further away. And I agree with that orientation's a little bit odd.
Thank you. I appreciate that clarification, because I was reading the soils report about the Lepoil and Candy Mountain series being this kind of silty sand, and it seemed like water could move through it pretty quickly, and I was worried about how close it might be to the pond. But it sounds like...
And there's a 150-foot buffer required from all of that.
Okay. I'm seeing it now 150 feet away from it, so that's
Gotcha.
yeah. Thank
Excellent.
you so much.
And then I just because I listening to Julian, it really was a challenge to take that architecture from an era of slavery and help move that to an era of welcoming and comfort. And that was kind of the challenge that Julian was asked to look at. And I just want to recognize that that is a difficult change to occur on that structure. Mm-hmm.
Thank you very much. Okay, discussion among commissioners.
Well, I'm going to start with just the thing I think that's the easiest to knock out, which would be the architectural significance. Because it's not listed, we do have a little bit more latitude, but we do have an expert saying it's eligible for recognition as a historical resource. With adaptive reuse, you always have a tension between the new use and the past use. And with the demands that are being placed on this building, there really isn't a way to allow for an institutional use to the scale that they're looking without having some modifications. And I'm comfortable with that because I think we should, it's a bad word, but we should exploit the fact that it's not actually formally listed and and also use our latitude under the use permit process to recognize the benefits of this project and therefore, and it's a design that isn't alter 100% of the building. There will be the sides and the rear that will remain unaffected, presumably, from what I can tell, that aren't going to be utterly transformed. Correct me if I'm wrong, I may be missing the elevations, but that was the one I was focused on. So I feel comfortable with not getting hung up on the dissonance that it gets created by the changes to the front of the building, at least. But maybe I should look at the elevations. Is the whole of the building, all sides, being affected by the? Yeah, maybe we could bring up that elevations. Yeah, let's take a look at those.
It's primarily the
elevation.
front and the side where the carport is.
Right.
And that side's fairly hidden from.
In my presentation, I did show the north, south, and east elevations in the site plans included with the staff report as an attachment. There is one page that includes all 4 directional elevations, implying that there would be changes to all 4 faces of the building, although my presentation did only include 3 faces.
Okay, I'll scrap that part of my.
Okay.
So we're looking at a change.
I would say in the bigger picture, I agree with everything you said. Whether or not we're changing the back, I believe the worthiness of this project, the intention of what the architecture is supposed to accomplish. I'm comfortable with what you said.
Yeah, I feel like historic preservation is always so wiggly. And if it was a different site with a different context, if it was more, in the heart of town, and probably if it was a style that's more, identified as one of our main architectural styles that people identify with Eureka, I might feel differently about what's being proposed. But that being said, I'm comfortable moving forward with this as well.
I really appreciated that Dr. Buxbaum talked to us about the need in the community and everything that's followed since then in the design of this project and looking at environmental impact has been done really professionally, and the staff report was very professional. I completely support this project.
So for me, I think Commissioner Lazar brought up a really good point with the Coastal Commission's role with this and our role in a conditional use, kind of leaning into trusting the rigor of the Coastal Commission and the discussions that have been had involving city staff. It is the word that came to mind as I was reviewing everything is this place is just magical. And, that's the part that I care more about, is that it's done sensitively in an environmental way. And it's easy to fixate on the bald eagle because they're iconic and have those specifics with it. But that species list was incredible. And so, I have a little trepidation, but come down on the side of trusting that the Coastal Commission will implement the recommendations and that we probably shouldn't make the job harder by going there ourselves. But I could certainly see an argument the other way.
Well, it occurred to me there might be a way to reconcile what I'm going to take an attempt at paraphrasing what I heard from staff, which is that if we get too into the biological details, we may end up having to revisit this project because our mitigation or conditions might be inconsistent with what gets brokered at the Coastal Commission and the project gets hopefully successfully decided. Is that a fair characterization? Okay. So maybe in the language of the conditions, there's a sort of kill switch if there's conflict, and so we just need to empower staff in applying the conditions and enforcing the conditions of approval to have the latitude to be able to say this was superseded. In this case, we said, like, for instance, construction is limited to September 1st to February 1st, and they say no, October 1st. Okay, well then that's the way it goes. So I think there's ways to reconcile it, but I just feel, I guess I feel like we're not doing our job if we just abdicate that. It's because the language of the findings in the staff report is pretty broad. It does reference the coastal plan, our coastal plan, and our charge, and it seems silly to not take stock of that when we approve a project. We do our best cut and do it in a way that doesn't mean that this comes back to us. If that sounds feasible, if it sounds problematic or a nightmare for implementing at the staff level, I'd love to hear that. Or if my other commissioners don't feel comfortable with that approach, can't wrap your head around it, please let me know.
So a clarifying question, Commissioner Lazar, is would you then be suggesting that we consider a new condition that would essentially say the applicant shall follow all recommendations of the biological report? And, in the case of the Coastal Commission requiring something more stringent, the more stringent regulation applies. Could it be that straightforward, or are you thinking about something more like in-depth and specific?
No, but if that doesn't do the trick from a staff perspective, I'm interested in hearing it. But that basically is what I was trying to describe. If you wouldn't mind, I'm just going to summarize what I noted as potential conditions that were not conditions. So, and these are just paraphrasing. The construction season that we've talked about already. The nesting season's outlined as February 1st to October 31st. Native plantings between the parking areas and forested wetlands. A nesting bird survey prior to any ground disturbance. It needs to be done within 7 days of the construction being commenced, and the footprint of the disturbance areas where the survey would occur, but also a 300-foot buffer around the footprint. And this is just from the NRM report. Vegetative screen for the parking areas with the certain vegetation they've outlined, myrtle and some other species. A split rail fence with signage, natural area please keep out, and no mowing of the herbaceous wetlands. Grazing is the only way to manage them. Those are the things I noted. I might have missed something, but we can just reference the NRM report. I think all of that lives there. I'd ask staff to correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that's where I saw everything. There was a wetland delineation and there was a biological survey. And between those two documents, I think that's where I found most of it. Okay. So we could have it really simple. Just say the mitigation measures and recommendations included in those reports are included as conditions of approval, but may be superseded if more stringent requirements are applied through the coastal permitting process with the Coastal Commission.
I would support that. Try to remember those words as we bring up the resolution, recommended resolution. And we might be able to add that to it. Could we see that at this time, Assistant Planner Smith? I know you had prepared a recommendation for us.
Yes, Principal Planner Getz is putting up there for us. So we have the suggested motion here. Reads, I move the Planning Commission adopt a resolution to conditionally approve the Sorrel Leaf Healing Center at 124 Indianola Road.
Commissioner Lazar, where would you think about amending? Is it in this suggested motion, or is it in the resolution that we were given in advance?
I think the resolution can be revised after the fact if the motion is clear, right?
Yeah.
So does that seem right?
If the commission wants to add a condition saying that they have to comply with the recommendations and suggestions in the biological report, unless the coastal commissions are more stringent, we will just change that when we have the vice chair sign the resolution.
I think that's the general gist of it. I guess I'll make that motion if that sounds okay. And then I just want to say that I thought this was, I think we can all recognize the value of the project, but a class 1 exemption for a project of this sort is a little hard for me to swallow. I am heartened by the fact that the Coastal Commission's process is a functional equivalent under CEQA, so it is a somewhat academic thing because by the time it gets through the other end, it's essentially gone through CEQA, even though it hasn't gone through CEQA. So I think it's fine, but I would say maybe the next time we have a project of this scope, I'll just point out that there's examples given in CEQA that, 2,500 square feet is the maximum, or 10,000 in an urbanized area. You can't have any sensitive, environmentally sensitive areas in the vicinity. I mean, those are things that are kickouts from that exemption. So I'm not too worried about it, but I just thought I would just speak about that at this point, just to make my feelings on that for the future. And you can't mitigate if you're doing an exemption. So that's another thing you got to keep in mind.
Did you make the motion?
I did.
You did? Okay.
Okay, I'll read it out. I'm going to say, I move the Planning Commission adopt a resolution to conditionally approve the Sorrel Leaf Healing Center project at 124 Indianola Road, subject to the recommended conditions, with the addition of a condition that all the recommendations included in the biological assessment and wetland delineation are implemented as a part of the project, unless superseded by requirements of the Coastal Commission's coastal permit.
I'll second that, and I share your, concerns about the use of the exemption. And I think I agree in this case, the CEQA equivalent will cover it.
Can I put this to a vote, commissioners? Okay, let's do that. I'd like to put this to the vote. All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed? None. Abstentions? None. Passed. Congratulations.
And congratulations to our new assistant planner as well. Excellent work.
Nice job. Very, very useful project.
I'm just picking my agenda back up. We'll move to the next item. Sorry, it's just going to take a minute to load. I think it's the 2030 Park renaming. Oh, there it is, right up. So let's hear a staff report on that one before.
Thank you, commissioners. I have 2 on my first night here. So the project presented for your consideration is the renaming of 2030 Park, which is located at 2605 Pine Street. Here is a bird's eye view of where the park is located. It's pretty centrally located in Eureka, about 7 blocks east of Broadway. Zooming in further, you'll see that the park is located between Union Street and California Street, just north of West Henderson Street. In 2019, the city of Eureka received $6.3 million to revamp this park, with major upgrades slated for the park, including things from an all-inclusive playground to sports courts to new parking and restrooms, fitness equipment, and the list goes on. So with this $6.3 million, the park's major upgrades, it provided an opportunity to reimagine the park's identity, including its name. So a survey was conducted, and results from the public survey showed 75% of respondents agreed the park should be renamed, and suggestions were provided for the name. The top 3 names were chosen, and an additional survey was conducted with 824 respondents voting for, with 824 respondents total, and 39% voting for Yas Park, which translates to where the cypress are. So Eureka Municipal Code, Chapter 152, Article 15, prescribes a process for naming and renaming of streets and other public facilities. The Open Space, Parks, and Recreation Commission recommended the name at their meeting on October 28th, 2022, and now it has been referred to you for recommendation to the City Council, whether to name the park as proposed or to recommend a different name. Following the Planning Commission's action, a report will be sent to the City Council for a future meeting, and the Council may approve the Commission's recommendation, remand the matter back to the Planning Commission, or for further consideration, or make its own decision on the matter. Staff recommends that the Planning Commission accept public comment and then adopt a resolution recommending the City Council rename 2030 Park as Yas Park, or where the cypress are. I have a suggested motion on the next slide, but I will stop screen sharing and allow for discussion.
Thank you, Assistant Planner Smith. I'd like to open it up to the Commission for questions for staff regarding this proposal.
I sent an email to Principal Planner Guest with a number of questions, and she was kindly answered all of them but one, which is, are there cypress at this park? So can we confirm that some of those trees are cypress?
I apologize. I did not see that question in the email. That's a good question. I don't know the answer to that. I know that Community Services staff is with us on the Zoom call this evening, and I'm sure that they can answer that question for us.
I'm gonna just throw this out there just in case I'm right, but I think I am, because it is in my neighborhood, and there's a row of trees that flank Jacob Haney Field, and I'm 95% certain they're cypress trees. They could be juniper, but they're definitely in the Cupraceaceae family. I think they're cypress though.
That was my thought, but I didn't want
Oh,
to
there
say
we
it
are.
if
Yes,
it wasn't.
they are.
Robin
in the
Praxter
chat.
says, yes, they are.
All right. As I noted in my email, it's a dumb question, but it was one I was curious about. So I'm happy.
I think it's a relevant question. Thanks for asking it. Okay, I would like to open up for public comment now. Is there anyone on Zoom who would like to speak to the commission? Raise your hand. I don't see anyone. Anyone from the Open Space, Parks and Recreation Commission or Community Services? Okay. All right. Let's bring it back to the commission. Let's close public comment first and bring it back to the commission. I was on Open Space, Parks and Recreation Commission for 10 years, and there were individuals who'd been on that commission for 30 plus years. And so I know that if it's already been through OSPR, there are people who are intimate with this park because it's agendized often in the OSPR meetings. So I know that they have been thorough in their recommending this forward to us, and I like that. I like that we are continuing to acknowledge unceded lands to Wiots by using place names that are important to them, and I'm supportive of that. I know the old history of the 2030 Club, people between 20 years old and 30 years old who put a lot of effort in at one point in 1952, but that club has long since stopped being active in this area. And so I don't think we're hurting anybody's feelings, particular about that. And I would put the WIOT naming as more important at this point in time. But I'd like to hear from other commissioners if you have opinions or comments on this.
I guess I'd like to know, it wasn't really clear. It said in the presentation and in the report there was an opportunity for renaming in light of the grant funding that emerged. I'd like to know more about the actual impetus for the renaming discussion, consideration. What actually was the origin of that decision to consider that?
I want to recognize Robin Presker, who would have a good answer to that.
Great.
We need to hear you, though. You're on mute. Darn. You might have to call in like the other person. If you have Principal Planner Getz on your speed dial, just give her a call.
Or Robin, I can join the meeting from my phone and you can speak like the last person did. If you want to hang on just for a second.
Have her turn her sound off on her computer. I'll just tell her. If you turn the sound off on your computer, we won't have the echoing problem. According to the IT.
Oh, I think I can do it. I did it before.
Oh, she's probably there. She gets a problem.
Hmm.
She's trying to call in. Is it ringing?
Mm-mm. Can you try speaking now? Nope, still can't hear you. Hang on just a second. It won't let me back to where I was before.
I can read what you typed in there if you'd like, Robin. She said we will be celebrating the club in history through interpretive signage.
I
Right.
did notice that, but I was more interested in the inception of the effort to consider whether to rename, how that originated.
Donna may have that information.
She can't speak either. I don't think.
Oh, man.
I'm almost there, you guys.
Donna, we cannot hear you, but we can see you.
And I can just reiterate, from the presentation from the staff report, I know that the survey was done to the community to ask, hey, should we rename this? But I don't know about the steps that occurred leading up to that question. So.
And I appreciate you giving us all the information that you're able to, and I noted all of it very carefully.
So I have you on my phone if somebody wants to speak.
Can you hear me now?
With echoes.
Yes.
Can you mute your computer?
I am on a cell phone, so if I mute myself, you would not be able to hear me.
Got it.
Let me turn down my volume, but then I won't be able to hear you. So, how is it now?
You're good, and Donna's here now too.
Okay, I'm gonna begin to talk, and I'm gonna turn my cell phone volume down. So I'll give a little spiel, and then I'll turn my volume up to check in. Okay, sorry for the technical difficulties, everybody. Challenging Zoom night. So my name is Robin Prasker with the Eureka Community Services Department, and I am part of the team that is bringing this forward. And the origin of thinking about renaming comes from quite a few years being in the planning process of reimagining this park. This process dates all the way back to early 2019 when we began going after grant funds to improve the park. One of the reasons the park was so competitive for the grant is due to the challenges in the neighborhood. There has been high crime rates at this park. And that can be attributed to a lack of modern facilities. When people are not using our public spaces appropriately, unfortunately, that does invite inappropriate use. And this park has been a very good example of that. As we began public outreach to try to reimagine this park and solicit grant funding, we heard a lot of feedback about the negative reputation of this park due to its history, along with the lack of identifying with the name. I've probably been in countless conversations with people saying, what is 20 Park? Where is 2030 Park? And what the heck does that mean? And as we got the grant, have been implementing it, we kind of thought to ourselves, well, gosh, if there was ever going to be a time to think about a rebranding, a reimagining of this park, including the name, now would be the time. So the way that we begun that process was to just ask the community, what do you guys think about a potential renaming? And we saw an overwhelming response of a yes, we're open to that. With having a grant fund, we have the opportunity for new signage. So this became a pertinent option prior to construction in the event that we did land on a new name. And that's kind of where we are now after our 2 surveys. So I'll pause there.
Thank you, Robin. Director Wood, would you like to add anything to that for us?
I think the only thing I would add is that we simply posed the question to the community, what do you think? And the response back was, in fact, there was an overwhelming desire to think of renaming the park. So pretty much went straight to the community for their thoughts and feedback. Mm-hmm.
Can I ask, were respondents given information about the park's, relationship to its name? Like the fact that the 2030 Club was instrumental in getting it established, and was that on the radar? Because as we just heard, most people don't know the origin of the name, even people in the neighborhood. So I guess if someone's answering a question about, hey, should we rename this park, and all they can think of is its connotation with the crime that's in the area or at the park, but don't understand the connection to the past, then it'd be easy to say, yeah, let's rebrand it. So how was that? Was there that information available?
Definitely. Anytime we've talked about 2030 Park in general, we did a ton of different community outreach events.
Ice cream socials. Ice cream socials.
Oh,
I
for
didn't
sure.
make it, but
yes. And every time we talked about it, it's always about it was one of the forming groups, a volunteer group that helped weigh in. And our plan is to do an interp sign telling the full history of how 2030 Park came to be, the history of the club itself.
So you feel confident that the people responding to the survey were aware of the name? And
I do.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And Robin added that the forward of the first survey contained information about the 2030 Park name.
Sorry, what were you? I'm sorry, I couldn't quite make out.
In the chat, Robin said that the forward of the first survey contained information about the 2030 Park name.
Oh, I gotcha. Thank you. I didn't see that. Sorry.
Other discussion among commissioners for this proposal to rename 2030 Park? Can you bring up the proposed recommended motion? Thank you. Principal Planner Getz. I move the Planning Commission adopt a resolution recommending the City Council rename 2030 Park as Da Yas, where the Cypress R Park.
I'll second.
Can I just say one thing before? So I
Additional
guess
conversation. Go ahead.
I'm in support of this, but I do have some concern about I think we've really fallen short of like actually helping the public understand. I get in the recent efforts to like re-envision the park, there was an opportunity for educating the public, but it's not something that historically occurred at that location. I mean, when I moved into my house, when I bought my house, the first thing I did is go over to 2030 Park and hang some basketball nets because there was no nets on the basketball hoops, and they were gone like 2 weeks later. But I did it again. So, and they stuck around for a while. People just don't really. We've fallen short of like actually educating the public. So all they have to associate with the park is the crime and the negativity. And so I don't blame anyone for having an interest in seeing and it's an opportunity, as well to help start bridging the divide between indigenous culture and settler culture. So I think it does a lot of good things. I really would like to see assurances that the signage and interpretation, it's an opportunity for a win-win to be able to hold on to the past and the connection and the significance of the fact there is a park there is because of a group of people and their dedication, but a new name that also points into the future. But I don't know how we do that in making a recommendation on a name change. I think it's just something that, in my mind, is an important opportunity we can reconcile both goals. But I don't know that we can count that will occur, I guess, other than there's been discussion about it and it's anticipated. That's what I see.
I appreciate your caring about the past and carrying history forward. It's really important for the identity of community. And there's so many levels of history that we can address that at. I think one thing that was hard to hear Robin say, just because the technical problems, was that there is going to be an interpretive sign that recognizes the 2030 Club and their part in creating that park. And so I think it's, like you said, using your own words, win-win is possible here, where several levels of history are acknowledged at the same time.
And Don, if I can put you on the spot for a nod, is that a definitive signage is planned and will be happening? Excellent. Okay, thank you.
And I guess this is just my feeling, is like there's levels of interpretation. So it's like the bare minimum is, something along the lines of this park was established through the efforts of a group called the 2030 Club. Check, you've done it. But moving on from there, actually exposition on what that club was. I've just looking on newspapers.com and the California Digital Newspapers Collection, I found countless instances of their civic engagement in this town. Now, they may have lost their footprint and their identity and all that, but it doesn't change the past, and there was a lot of good done. So doing more than just putting a label on something, in my mind, is what would do justice to the legacy of this group and their connection to that location.
I'd like to make a request of Director Wood that as interpretive signage is being developed, that you bring it back just for information for us, not as an approval item, but just keep us in the loop of what that's looking like, and that we'll be hoping to see something that's substantial about the 2030 Club. Thank you. Other comments? Okay, let's put it to the vote. All in favor, say aye.
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 Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? None? It passes. Before we move on to the director's reports on the coastal land use plan, I would just ask for, let's just make it a 3-minute break for everyone to use bathrooms. We've been sitting for a while, and stretch out. Back in 3? Okay. Okay, we're back from a short recess, and our next item is item I. It's the Coastal Land Use Plan Document Review Session 3. We're going to receive a staff report, and I'd like to turn this over to Kristen.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Good evening, Commissioners. This is the third in a series of our review sessions on the draft comprehensive LUP update. So to recap, the city's local coastal program, or LCP for short, is the standard of review for coastal development permits. So if somebody comes in with a coastal development permit application, it has to be consistent with this document. And there are two parts: the land use plan, or LUP, and the implementation plan, or IP. And the LUP is the parts of our general plan that apply to the coastal zone and are relevant to the Coastal Act. And the implementation plan are the parts of our municipal code necessary to carry out the LUP. So we're doing the comprehensive update to the LUP now. And then once we submit that for certification to the Coastal Commission, we'll start working through the IP. So we're proposing the new updated LUP as a coastal element of the 2040 general plan that duplicates relevant portions of other 2040 general plan elements and includes additional policies and maps necessary to carry out the Coastal Act. Staff is proposing it be organized into 6 chapters, and today we're looking at the land and aquatic resources chapter. And then we're also bringing the figures from the public access and recreation chapter to you that were not ready yet last time. So again, things to keep in mind. This coastal element only applies in the coastal zone. So if we think we want to add a policy and we want it to apply citywide, we would want to add it to a different part of the general plan. It's also a part of the general plan, so the policies are intended to be broad so that they remain relevant for a 20-year planning horizon. So we're trying to keep the details in the IP. And then also, it must conform with the Coastal Act, and that's puts constraints on what we can propose, especially with the land and aquatic resources chapter, because we have to be as protective of coastal resources as the Coastal Act. So aquatic has 2 U's. I don't know how that happened. Here are the 6 sections of the draft chapter. There's 55 proposed policies in this chapter, so I'm not going to read every single one of them to you tonight. I'm just going to hit the highlights. And then feel free to stop me as we go to discuss. So the first section is the water quality and hydrology section, which is focused on protecting the water quality and hydrology of coastal waters, particularly through addressing stormwater runoff, which is a huge source of pollution. And so in the 2040 general plan, the goals are written as an answer to the question, what do we want to see? And this goal is a duplicate of an existing goal that's in the natural resource chapter of our general plan: protection, enhancement, and restoration of water resources, as well as improvement of water quality. So something to note is that the California Coastal Commission staff reviewed an earlier version of this chapter, and they specifically asked us to incorporate Coastal Act sections 30230 and 30231, which talk about protecting water quality and the biological productivity and quality of coastal waters and marine resources. So we added that policy language. And they also said that we needed to add stormwater control policies, and we couldn't just cite consistency with the MS4 permit or reference the city's stormwater ordinance. We had to have separate policies in this document, and I can explain their reasoning for that. But they have a bunch of model stormwater control policies on their website, and they wanted us to add those. And we attempted to add the content of those, but they're very long and detailed, and so we wanted to keep the details for the IP for the coastal zoning code. So we tried to make them a little bit more broad than what was recommended. So that's my only slide for the water quality and hydrology section, if you had comments on that section.
Would you mind just briefly, articulating the Coastal Commission's desire for kind of redundancy with the MS4?
Because the Coastal Act has separate water quality protection policies, so they have a separate mandate than the regional board to the state water control board to protect water quality. And their concern is like our stormwater ordinance could change. So if we're referencing it now and it's good now, that's fine, but it could change with it because they don't have control over certifying it. So they don't like when you reference documents that can change without their review, because it might not be consistent later. I think that kind of explains what their thinking is.
That makes sense, I guess, yeah, to kind of hold us to a certain standard.
I have a few questions and or suggestions, and I really love that you do this in bite-sized pieces for us, and I really appreciate the color coding of language that's added. And so in water quality and hydrology, I guess this is section 4 below page 4.1 is background. So just, I think it's the first, the second 4.2, the second paragraph. Just in talking about land and aquatic resources, it's, it mentions at the bottom sentence of paragraph 2, Cooper Gulch and First Slough, / First Slough, and then it goes right into Second Slough. Just for clarity of the naming of the sloughs, and because for the Beta Zoo we're using the term McFarland Creek and McFarland Slough, I would think that maybe to be consistent, Cooper Gulch and First Slough as written, but then maybe McFarland Slough and Second Slough.
Okay.
And then there's actually a third slough that goes by Safeway. It's on the other side of Harris before you get to actually Eureka Slough. So you're kind of going from from downstream to upstream here. And I might just make that suggestion for you to consider some of the other names in there if you're trying to be complete.
Yep, that's helpful. Thank you.
Sure. And let me see, my next comment is LAR2, I believe. I don't know if other commissioners have something before that. Oh, no, yeah, LAR 1.9 and 110 is where I want to go. Yeah, this was based on comments before of construction phase stormwater management is LAR 19 and LAR 110. And LAR 16 is that early context for specific design and planning. It just seems that, like in tonight's application, we didn't get, while I could go through the plans and find little stormwater elements, there wasn't sort of a, one full page that you usually see in construction level plan sets, that shows the stormwater erosion sediment control and stormwater control plan. And it would just be nice to have that. And I guess what I'm seeing, and I think that's consistent to ask for that in advance for the commission. And I know you said that you would give it to us, but part of the reason I think that LAR 1.6 early context for specific design and planning really supports that, that LAR 1.9 and LAR 1.10. They don't indicate that they're submitted specifically after the design submittal. So it seems like keeping with following what's most stringent, we might want to put some language in there that doesn't necessarily excuse it until after the fact, because it can be kind of misleading that construction phase erosion and sediment control wouldn't come until the construction phase, but it doesn't mean you don't plan for it.
Praj mentioned when he was talking with you about that, that comes from the contractor. So if there's not a contractor that's been selected at the time that that the project comes before you, there is no plan to offer to you.
In the MS4 permit, it's so you have to get a contractor first on board before they. Yeah, you're right. I
mean,
know that.
If we have one, we are certainly happy to provide that to you, but generally we don't have one, and it's not required by Public Works Engineering that one be provided until we get to the construction phase.
But then that would be past our chance to review it.
It would be.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, I'll just have to let go of that one.
I
It's
think
important to me.
Commissioner Benson, though, we do need to know like what they're doing post-construction, LID-wise, to manage stormwater up front before we approve our discretionary approvals, because like you said, it could affect ground disturbance area and all that stuff. So but I anticipate us having that detail in the coastal zoning code. That's usually where we explain like what would be required specifically of an applicant and when. And I think to implement, like you said, policy 1.6, we could say that we would need to have that information up front to implement this policy. But I would recommend that we put that in the coastal zoning code, that requirement that we get that information up front.
Okay. Yeah, that sounds good. Especially the stuff that requires ground disturbance. I'm not looking to see silt fence details and straw water details, things that's minor mechanical erosion sediment control, but things like infiltration galleries or terracing that requires grading. It seems like that's the stuff we probably ought to see. Okay, moving on to LAR 2.8. Or you may not be there yet.
I'm not there yet. Thank you.
This just occurred to me, and I don't know that it's a good idea, but I just wanted to ask because, and it may be a zoning implementation level thing, but I'm going to try to explain it. Let's say we have a project that has a lot of impervious surface and it's going to struggle to try to detain the runoff and meter it off the site and limit and maybe it's just really impractical to reconcile the project design and its ambition with the goals of stormwater detention and infiltration. In the context of like an offsite mitigation where we have like maybe a mitigation bank, and we've targeted a bunch of locations that could be retrofitted throughout the city that would, through redevelopment or, implementation of more sophisticated stormwater, they could lower their amount of flow and runoff during events, like to help a project like that not have to like forfeit its ambition because it's going to do it in places where ultimately it's draining to the bay, ultimately it's draining to the same watersheds. Now we are dealing with the coastal area, so that's the end of the line for a lot of stormwater in many cases, so it's a little harder.
I actually think that's a really good idea because in the coastal zone, there's a lot of sites where the groundwater is already at like 1 foot below the surface, so I don't think LID might even work on some coastal sites.
Right.
But all of the stormwater drains to Humboldt Bay. So if you paid into LID features on roadways upstream, which could reduce, but yeah, I think there's a potential to, if it's not feasible at the site, to mitigate it off-site in maybe a better way, especially thinking about all these coastal sites with really high groundwater and maybe their LID features aren't going to function for that long. When it's a policy 1.11 talks about if you're a development of water quality concern, you basically have to demonstrate that you're going to address the design storm on site through on-site infiltration, or you have to provide an alternatives analysis to explain like why that's not feasible, and then you have to do other things. But are you thinking maybe it would be good to have a separate policy that also just talked in general about exploring an off-site mitigation bank?
Unlike like a parking in Luffy, it doesn't have to be so abstract. You can achieve a lot of benefit, like you just were saying. It just has to have that policy concept, framework to hang it on.
I haven't seen that in a LUP before, but I will ask the Coastal Commission what they think about that and see if we could do something like that.
And maybe the engineering department too.
And it would be powerful if we like preloaded in the plan, like, opportunity areas or something like that. So it's like, these are all targeted, just like like in some LUPs, you'll see like restoration sites that are identified as like mitigation, opportunities. So it's something akin to that, I think. It just could be a day where it's the stormwater stuff really stymies a otherwise useful project just because it's limited with what you can do, So, okay, thanks for understanding and interpreting that.
I also wanted to mention I got a call from the new watershed steward of the regional board today, and she said she was going to be giving me comments. So when you see this chapter again, we'll have incorporated more stuff too. Okay.
Actually, I'm sorry. Before we go on, I'm realizing one of the policies that Humboldt Baykeeper mentioned was in this first section. I'm wondering if you've reviewed that and have any comments on it. LAR 1.10.
Yeah. So she's Baykeeper. This letter says, there should be some consideration about when designing LID features like vegetated swales, that it's not going to be digging into a contaminated area. And we dealt with this with that parking lot by next to Bayfront 1, and they had to design it differently because of that. So maybe this could be tied into the sea level rise thing about, analyzing the appropriateness of LID on that side. And if it's not appropriate for the site due to sea level rise, groundwater rising or contamination, then it goes elsewhere.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, sorry. Right. Environmentally sensitive habitat area is the next thing. So this section is implementing Coastal Act Policy 30240, which has two parts. The first part is about if you're developing in an environmentally sensitive area, it says that you're only allowed to, you can't disrupt the habitat value, and only uses dependent on such resources shall be allowed in such areas. And so we've included this language in LUP policies, and currently we define ESHA as like any wetland is an ESHA, and that's more restrictive than the Coastal Act. The Coastal Act just says their definition of ESHA talks about where plants or animal life or their habitat is especially rare or valuable. So one example is this wetland that is behind Eureka Natural Foods that was created by the removal of a building footprint, and it's contaminated. And right now, under our current existing LCP, it's defined as an ESHA, which gives it even more protection and requires buffers. And if instead it was, unless there's a northern red-legged frogs in there, it's not an ESHA. That's what we're proposing now, is that it has to have, it has to be special. So like a special important natural community, or have some important plant or animal that relies on it. And also the Coastal Commission, they don't have the Coastal Act and Coastal Regs doesn't have a definition of what a resource dependent use is. So they like to have that put into LUPs. And one thing to note is that we're proposing adding tribal access to tribal cultural resources as a resource-dependent use. And I've never seen that in another LUP, but I remember Chair Hernandez came to the Coastal Commission to remove a log from a stream for cultural resource purposes, and it was a struggle because of the ESHA policy. So I would propose that that's, if it's for tribal cultural resource reasons, that counts as resource dependent. Also, we added the allowance for temporary construction disruption. in ESHA if there's no feasible alternative. And the reason for this is there's roads that go through ESHA, and so to repair them, there's like no alternative but to temporarily impact the ESHA. I saw this certified in the Half Moon Bay's LUP that was recently certified by the Coastal Commission, so I added it, but they might take it out because it isn't stated in the Coastal Act. Also, they required us to have an ESHA map. I tried to push back on that. And so we're proposing a potential ESHA map, which I've seen in other sort of recently certified LUPs, where we looked at the National Wetlands Inventory and California Natural Diversity Database mapping and used that to define where ESHA might be, which is pretty much anywhere that's not paved. And anywhere that's on this map requires a site-specific biological assessment to determine if ESHA exists or not. And there's also a policy that says even if you're not on this map, you may need a biological site assessment if there's some evidence that ESHA may exist on or near your site. The second part of 30240 talks about development next to ESHA, and this is where buffer policies come from. It says development in areas adjacent to environmentally sensitive habitat shall be sited and designed to prevent impacts which would significantly degrade such areas. So there's no buffer distance in the Coastal Act. This is the standard that it doesn't significantly degrade the ESHA. So we've included this language, and staff is recommending we keep our existing ESHA buffer policy, which calls for a 100-foot minimum standard, but allows for further reduction with site-specific analysis and mitigation by an expert to ensure no degradation occurs. And I've seen a lot of different buffer policies, and I think ours is good because it sets a high bar, and if you can pass that, then you don't have to worry. And if you don't pass it, there's flexibility that you could go down to a very small buffer if that's all you truly needed to protect the habitat.
Criteria, right, for ESHA buffer reduction, and that's a policy of the, or no, help us understand, help me remember what the heck I'm talking about.
Yeah, so back in, I believe, the late 70s or a long time ago, the Coastal Commission put out guidance on, and in that guidance it talked about 7 criteria for reducing an ESHA buffer, but that guidance is no longer, it's not used by the Coastal Commission. They don't look at those 7 criteria. But we would probably put that in the IP. We will have in the IP definitely like a list of things to look at to figure out if...
Like the project we saw earlier, I think I remember reading in the biological assessment, use those criteria or something very like that.
Our current application requires them to review the 7 criteria.
Yeah, and the county's does as well. So that's what I was wondering. Is that what you envision, though, for escaping the 100-foot standard?
Yeah, we'll have a bunch of things they have to look into, like the 7 criteria. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks.
I also appreciate that you put in the language that the city may require a buffer greater than 100 feet as well.
With like the bald eagles, they need a bigger buffer than 100 feet. So in certain circumstances, yeah. So the Coastal Commission likes to see a policy that explains what all is allowed in ESHA buffers, and I think I recommend using the 30240B language, that it's anything that doesn't prevent anything that wouldn't significantly degrade the area, and leave it more flexible in the LUP, because once you start naming things, you've forgotten things, or things haven't been invented yet. So and then same with mitigation parameters and habitat restoration plan parameters, just setting up the criteria to look at, like what you need to look at to think about your mitigation ratio instead of setting a specific mitigation ratio. Other policies are about vegetation planting in and near ESHA, exterior lighting impacts on ESHA, and programmatic CDPs for vegetation management plans. For instance, there's a programmatic Spartina removal CDP for the bay, and that's really helpful not to have to come in for a CDP every time you have a Spartina removal project. So encouraging more of those. I think this is my last slide on ESHA, if there's other comments.
I want to make one comment on LAR 210, invasive plant species prohibition. And it just simply says prohibit planting of invasive non-native plants. What I would like to add, or have you consider adding to that, is as identified in the Humboldt weed management area, lists of invasive species of greatest concern. And as the former chair of the Humboldt weed management area, we put together pamphlets and lists of those invasive species that are put Humboldt County habitats most at risk. And so it might be nice just to reference that so that people have it. And then also at the state level, the California Invasive Plant Council list A, B, and C of invasive species. They have three lists, the A, B, and the C list, and it might be good to reference those as well, just so that people have some place to go. And they're always keeping those updated as well, so they're not static, set at some in 1970 or something, and then we have new species coming in. They're always being updated. So
Thanks, I appreciate that.
sure.
Maybe like an including but not limited to, so that they're not just, if there's something that somebody's got a blind spot for, the Coastal Commission's not going to say, well, you don't want to go with that because we have our list and it's not like that list.
Sure. It's just the most localized list that I know of.
So I heard like two different sources.
Yeah, the state level one, and then the local.
That sounds good to me.
Yeah, including but not limited to sounds like good language to me. Yeah. Thank you, Stephen.
Generally, I just want to voice support for the direction this section is going. I appreciated the example of the lot behind Eureka Natural Foods. I always drive past that and I'm just like, why? So anything that can, kind of make it so less things get captured in the net, I think is a step in the right direction. And I'm really excited to see that. I'm sure a lot of landowners in that part of town would be excited too. I had a question about LAR 2.3. I'm feeling it like it's kind of a little spooky how broad it is. And I'm wondering if you would be able to, share sort of what the vision is for any criteria that might come up in the IP, like specifically in the case of what if you aren't mapped and you are in a site that may have ESHA near your project site, but not on your project site. Like in what cases would someone come to the counter and be like, seriously? You know what I mean?
Yeah, that concerns me with this policy too. And I couldn't figure out a good way to do that. A lot of times, if somebody's doing something minor and they're near a wetland, we just assume it's ESHA and work from there instead of like requiring them to do a biological report, So that's one alternative.
Well, and as an example, the Walgreens is affected by that parcel that's behind them, and they haven't been able to do a couple of things that they wanted to do on that side.
Or maybe you could rely on another biological report if it's done in the last 5 years.
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't have a solution at the moment.
Like the 100-foot, standard. But of course, you have to know that there's a ESHA or suspect one. But if you're like outside of 100 feet, no need, to do further investigation.
I think that would be, unless there was a raptor nest or something, if you're over 100 feet from what might be ESHA, you wouldn't need to do a biological assessment.
Yeah, I think the language as written is likely fine, but I'm hoping that in the IP there might be an opportunity to think a little bit more carefully about putting parameters on when that might apply.
Okay, moving on. Wetlands and watercourses. This implements Coastal Act Policy 30233, which has 3 things about filling or diking or dredging wetlands. 1, there has to be no feasible, less environmentally damaging alternative. 2, feasible mitigation measures have to be provided to minimize adverse environmental effects. And 3, there's only 7 use categories that are allowed for wetland fill. And they're all like public access related or coastal dependent recreation or independent or coastal dependent industry related. So we've included the language in the LUP policies. We also have an existing certified LUP policy about maintaining fill along our northern waterfront as long as we just stay within the existing fill footprint. So included that. I don't know if they're going to certify that, but it's in our existing LUP. And then the part of the wetland definition that Baykeeper mentions was an accident in copying and pasting from the coastal code. So I'm going to take that sentence out that is mentioned in the Baykeeper letter. But I did want to point out this other sentence that was added that's not in the Coastal Act that says agricultural ponds and stormwater, wastewater, and hazardous material containment infrastructure don't meet the definition of wetlands if constructed and continuously maintained for their intended functions. And this is something that the Coastal Commission generally follows, even though it's not in their regulations. And what it means is that, you know, our wastewater ponds they meet the wetland criteria, but they were built as wastewater ponds and they've always been maintained that way. So we would not regulate them under our wetland policy like other wetlands. Same if somebody created a stormwater drainage swale to capture and infiltrate runoff. If we then said, oh, that's a wetland and it's regulated under 30233, you wouldn't be able to maintain it for its intended function because stormwater management isn't an allowed use of wetland excavation. So as long as it's been built for that intended function and maintained as that, then it gets to not have to follow the wetland fill policy or diking, dredging, filling policy.
But if, to the contrary, if you built a cattle stock pond in this Eureka city limits and stopped running cattle on that land 30 years ago and it's maintained hydromorphic features of a wetland and all that, that would be a wetland?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, thanks.
So it's on you to maintain it. Otherwise, that was it. Any other questions about that section?
Thanks for figuring out a way to not say man-made.
Okay. Channel dredging and sediment relocation. The goal of this section is to have adequately maintained navigation channels providing access to and from coastal dependent industrial facilities, docks, marinas, and boat ramps with dredging and sediment relocation performed in a manner which maximizes coastal resource benefits and minimizes and mitigates adverse impacts. And there's 3 policies or proposed policies, one about promoting dredging, one about parameters on when and how you can dredge, and one about parameters for what to do with the sediment from the dredging. And I'm wondering now, reading the goal again, whether there maybe is need for another policy about promoting beneficial reuse of dredged spoils in general. Any thoughts?
I mean, it's probably pretty straightforward to have a policy that encourages reuse and doesn't require it. I mean, probably wouldn't hurt anything, if I'm understanding that correctly.
I think having a policy just for beneficial reuse of sediments would go beyond just sediments from permitted dredging activities. It could be just clean fill taken from, other locations that has a beneficial reuse. And so I think there might be some merit in having a separate and standalone beneficial reuse of excavated sediments, because it could cover some more things, or perhaps add it to this, that it's not just sediments, material removed from dredging activities.
Any other thoughts?
An example would be, the Hickshari Trail, the old dog park that used to be down there that then ended up being the mitigation site for the Hickshari Trail, taking out those sediments, and they got moved to the new dog, or the dog park up by Juvenile Hall, and some of it got put at Halverson Park, and those weren't dredged sediments; those were just excavated sediments from restoration that needed a better place to live, and it was clean fill.
Yeah, that totally makes sense.
Yeah,
we can add that.
So it sounds like you were saying that the Baykeeper's comment about the wetland definition, and it sounds like maybe it was like an error. I'm not sure if it's really tied to policy 4.3, but is there anything that we should talk about in this?
Oh yeah, this is a
that?
separate comment of Baykeepers that we should address, making sure that we're not, like, the receiving site and the dredge spoils are not contaminated. And policy 4.3 says that aspects to consider before issuing a coastal development permit for these purposes are the suitability of the material, including with respect to cleanliness. Cleanliness was one of the. But if we're thinking of a new policy about this, I think we could say it more clearly.
And maybe just change out the word cleanliness to contamination. I mean, it's kind of potato, but maybe that would clarify.
Yeah.
I do support Baykeeper's input on this, and I think Delo's kind of on the right track as far as the language of cleanliness to me is a little weird, and contamination gets more to the point, which I think is where they're going. And I'm currently working on a project that has this exact issue out of the coastal zone, but still where stormwater features and things were done in areas of or potentially in the areas of contamination, and it really escaped the attention until way too late. So it is an issue I'm sure we will see in projects in the future along the waterfront.
All right, next section, cultural resources. Implements Coastal Act Policy 30244, which talks about where development would adversely impact archaeological resources, reasonable mitigation measures shall be required. So we're covering this with the first policy, but we've made it more protective. So we've said avoid impacts where feasible, and instead of reasonable mitigation measures, we're saying minimize and mitigate impacts to the maximum extent feasible. And then there's all these great policies existing in the 2040 General Plan Cultural Resource section that we're just proposing to repeat here. And then we're proposing one additional policy that talks about how pre-development archaeological surveys and or excavation monitoring could be required and when that might happen.
Something that when I was going through looking at this, I was just curious, like, is there any, what criteria are used, or do we need a policy when there are, multiple levels of cultural resources? And, which one is more important than the other? I mean, I go back to Tuluwat, the Gunther Island shipbuilding facility was on the historic register, as was Tuluwat Village. and they both had standing. So I don't know if that ever comes up in Eureka, where there's multiple kinds of standing of different historic periods, and which one trumps the other.
I'm sure it will come up. Yeah.
So we haven't had to create a policy yet because it hasn't come up often enough.
It's usually either or on the locations that I'm aware of.
Okay, thank you.
It totally could come up though, and I wouldn't know what to do with that.
Is this section intended to be specific to tribal cultural resources or more expansive to like architectural historic resources? Because it's reading very specific to tribal archaeology right now.
That was purposeful.
Okay.
Because the Coastal Act and the Coastal Commission are really focused on archaeological resources, which can include historical, but it's like rail ties or something. It's not buildings. And we do already have these separate historic preservation regulations, and I didn't want those getting caught up in being people appealing to the Coastal Commission on that topic, because that really isn't a topic that's covered by the Coastal Act or which they have expertise on. So I was trying to keep that out of our LCP.
That makes sense. I think the vision that we talked about featured both though, right?
It does mention it because 30251 about visual resources talks about being consistent with the character of the setting. So I do think in building design, it does come up especially in Old Town, when you're surrounded by historic buildings. To be consistent with the character, you have to be compatible with them. So I think we will have a little bit of language, and we do have a little bit of language in our current LCP, but it's not a big thing.
Cultural resource like the eucalyptus trees on Highway 101 approaching Eureka, where is that covered by policy for people who feel that that's a cultural resource because it's been there for a long time and it means something to them?
That would be a cultural landscape, but there are many forms of those, and it's debatable.
Would it be housed in this section though, if it was to be housed anywhere, or would there be a different place for it?
This would be where it would be housed.
Okay, so there's not like an aesthetic view shed section
that would protect the eucalyptus.
Yeah, I know we're gonna get in sticky territory if we bring that up. But okay, that's good to know that it would be here if it had a place. Thank you.
Fun fact, I wrote a poem about those trees.
Oh, cool.
I would love to hear it.
Our awesome North Coast Journal.
That's awesome. Maybe someday during public comment, you can leave the dais and
read
a poem.
Intro section, we could talk more about like what archaeological resources entail and how it could be all these different things.
I think we need a crosswalk to non-archaeological cultural resources. I mean, I think not all coastal communities are blessed, with a intact landscape of historical buildings to the extent that Eureka is. And to Commissioner Benson's comments, there is a tension there between the prehistoric and the later historic. But I do think we have to acknowledge both, or we're really losing sight of that. And I want to remember, of course, that we're talking about what's the title of this? I don't know.
Land and aquatic resources.
Yeah, so it's like it's all fuddled under that right now. But I looked at the chapters, the land use, public access.
Yeah, this is where we talk about.
This is where it's going to be. So it is a weird title, but it includes this area of cultural resources. So, yeah, I do have some thoughts, but one thing is that I think I missed the first policy, the 5.2, a second policy, that we continue to identify, protect, and preserve significant archaeological sites and conduct good faith government-to-government consultation with local tribes to identify and protect tribal cultural resources. I was interested in seeing some quasi AB 52, SB 18 concept in the plan, so I think that's the closest to it. Making that an automatic, not a CEQA trigger, not a general plan amendment trigger, which is what normally the only places where an agency is obligated to do it is when you are doing an environmental document or when you are doing a general plan amendment. But you can write it into your policies and say, we're going to engage with the local tribes. That's a policy. So would you say that that gets to that part 2, 5.2? Protection?
Well, in our E88, that's where that requirement comes from.
The general plan, right?
Yeah. And it is our policy we refer all of our discretionary projects, and we refer any ground disturbance in the coastal zone basically to, yes, we do. Anytime people come to us and let us know about ground disturbance in the coastal zone, even if it's exempt, we let the tribes know about it and we refer it to them. I would think that detail, though, we could put in the IP.
It seems like it'd be fitting, because it's essentially you've morphed into like that's our policy, but could it be codified, in a way that it's in the plan itself? I think it might be.
It could, yeah.
And
Kristen
I think
has something.
No, I was just going to say back on the cultural resources. I think if we look at our inadvertent discovery language that we use, there's some archaeological stuff and paleontological language in there, so that might give us some direction.
I think having a definition of tribal cultural resources is helpful, and then we do, right? Is that in here? Is there a definition?
It's in the third paragraph in the intro. It says a tribal cultural resource is defined by Public Resource Code to include, and then it's a summary because the actual definition is very long.
Yeah, but it's on the glossary.
I think in the glossary we just quote that section again, don't we? Or did I?
I don't see it. I don't see any T's.
Well, if it's in Public Resources Code, it's somewhere else, I guess.
Well, the only reason I bring it up is because when we did the cannabis regulations at the county, we kind of created a different concept, not just the Public Resources Code. And this is something I wanted to fly with you guys is we added a sentence that said tribal cultural resource shall also include sites or resources identified by the tribe through an action of the tribal council or equivalent body. That was our way of giving them deference when it came to these determinations. It is giving power to another party and not having any ability to do anything about it if they go nuclear with it. But it hasn't been abused in my experience in the county level, and in what you see with the state mandates that are in the laws that compel government to government consultation, like for instance the latest one, AB 52, is that the lead agency gets to kind of shine on the tribe if they disagree. The tribe can say this is important to us, and they can say, well, we took that under consideration, but we figured it differently. So it's kind of, this is like one of those things where we can either be deferential or we can use the protocols that are already outlined in other parts of the laws that will govern land use action.
Can you read it one more time? I had a momentary space out. Thank you.
So the sentence we've added in our cannabis rules that I think we could easily pilfer is tribal cultural resource shall also include sites or resources identified by the tribe through an action of the tribal council or equivalent body.
So how do you know what those are?
They know what they are. That's the whole point.
So you have to depend on them to say something.
Yeah.
And if they don't, oh well.
Well, I mean, you can engage in referrals, and that's the opportunity for them to make these things known. But it has happened on occasion in the county, especially with the Yurok tribe within their ancestral area. So I don't know if there's interest among the commissioners, but yeah, to me, that's the kind of thing that starts to repair some of the divide. Is those are the types of letting them be the authority on things of that nature. Really,
I would support language like that in the policy.
The other thing that we audited with cannabis that may or may not be relevant in the city, but it could be, is the concept of a tribal ceremonial site. So cultural resources are one thing, but there are other flavors, and it could be land that's privately held or land that's publicly owned that is of use to a tribe for a ceremonial purpose, and nobody would know because they're not going to tell us, but they use it. And so we came up with a definition. I could read it if you're interested. That could be in the glossary and it could be referenced. So It means locations where ceremonial activities are conducted by a California Native American tribe within their area of traditional tribal cultural affiliation. That's a definition for a tribal ceremonial site.
And so did you add that to the definition of tribal cultural resource, or did it get added some other way?
We added it as just its own definition, and we referenced it in a policy that pointed to buffers, basically. In the case of the cannabis rules, it was at 1,000-foot buffer, but
Maybe it could go under like 5.5, repatriation of tribal cultural resources.
Yeah, something about
Or there's like
allowing
lands.
access to, if we're feasible, and
or where you're talking about beneficial uses. It could be an instance where something would have, a benefit that could be otherwise conflicting with a policy, like the ESHA protections. And okay, so I'll stop there for now because those are the tribal related ones. I do have some ones about non-tribal cultural resources, if interested. Do you want to go first, Ela?
Oh, sure. Yeah. I just wanted to say that I am supportive of staff bringing back something that incorporates something along the lines of what Steve suggested. And it sounds like the vice chair is as well. And it might be a good idea to send staff what you have. And also, I think staff has already done a super good job, pushing the envelope for what we can do to be partners with the tribes. And that is recognized and appreciated.
I agree.
I like all that.
Okay, moving on to non-tribal cultural resources. I think we should reference the Old Town National Register Historic District, which is a thing, and it is in the coastal zone. I have a map that shows it here.
yeah, I'm aware of the historic district.
So just in case you're wondering, there's a district, and it does include a number of structures throughout Old Town. It's defined as the, I think it's the area between certain streets. I can't remember. But anyways, I think it would be relevant to include a reference to that because, for instance, in section, where is it? You have a reference to historical structures like the Carson Mansion, I think, or something like that.
In the visual resource section,
Yeah.
it's as being a resource, a visual,
Yes.
a scenic resource.
I'm trying to find it right now. What page am I on? 416? I think that's what it is. 416. Okay. Yes. So you say aspects of the built environment considered scenic resources include the following: waterfront boating and fishing facilities, including piers, docks, and wharves, historically significant buildings in Old Town, and other designated historic landmarks, including the Carson Mansion. So I think it would be good to reference the actual district itself, because it is an assemblage of buildings. It's not just one building. It's the buildings in total. And there are contributing structures and there are non-contributing structures. So, including contributing structures within the Old Town Historical District or something like that, not just Old Town in general. Like, it has a specific bound area and it is on the National Register. Not just because you say even those determined to be eligible for listing on the National Register, but these are, I think on the register, not determined eligible. I could be wrong.
No, so we can add contributing structures within
within the National Register Historical District. I also have sorry, I'm almost done. Unlisted structures and cultural landscapes determined eligible for listing on a state, local, or National Register of Historical Resources, because those exist as well. And then lastly, ruins along the waterfront are eligible for recognition as scenic and historic resources where retaining sufficient integrity to provide a linkage to the area's industrial past. That's just an idea, but that, like if you think of at the foot of Del Norte Street, where you see the ruins of a railroad that doesn't exist anymore, those are arguably an important feature, albeit they're not, if their loss would potentially be something, but there'd be a tension there. Maybe there might be a tribal cultural resource right there, So balancing those competing objectives might be tricky, but not acknowledging that those exist. I think there's a lot of them, the old pilings along the waterfront. There's a lot of vestiges of that may have.
I agree that some pilings are like the crumbling pilings are definitely add to the character of the area, but some of them we want to that aren't deemed historic. We want to allow removal of as mitigation for wetland fill. So if we said all ruins were scenic resources, then if we ever tried to remove any, the Coastal Commission might get appealed to the Coastal Commission and denied if we wanted to.
I wouldn't want to be categorical for sure. Just introducing that concept that something that might not be a structure or it might be a very dilapidated one could have historical significance. But I don't know, I would leave it to staff, but I think you could probably do it in a way that doesn't commit it to automatic significance.
We could, if we had a policy instead of just deeming it a scenic resource, that, if it ended up that it was deemed historic, then it would be significant. I know there are ones that are deemed historic. There's like the one that I've seen it in reports before.
It just seems like to me, if it isn't going to make a difference, then why include it, I guess. I know it's not very articulate, but if it isn't actually going to protect any of the resources, it's not a very strong policy. But I guess it's maybe good to just celebrate it. I mean, I think they're very cool. Yeah. So I wouldn't necessarily want to have all of the railroad, ruins taken out for wetland mitigation. I don't know if that's what you were meaning to say, or if just some of them would be.
For instance, the city got a coastal development permit to add a separate boat launch on the Samoa Bridge boat launch for non-motorized boats to be separate from motorized, and they're doing mitigation by pulling some old piles at Parcel 4. And they're cool and old. I've been out to Parcel 4, but there's so much of it there.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't want to make the whole thing, be sacred for sure. But if we don't acknowledge it, I could see a project coming along one day where it's redeveloping a site and somebody would say, that's an important part of our landscape. And I go, well, there's no recognition of that in there. It doesn't protect, just like Kristen was saying, the Coastal Act doesn't really care about that, like these are not given much standing.
I'm supportive of what you're saying. And I think probably what we're doing is just laying like a big, poopy diaper bomb for somebody 10 years from now to like come to a city council meeting and be like, but policy 5.9 says, anyway, I'm very much supportive. And I also think we just need to be prepared for somebody to like curse our name down the line.
Yeah, I think we would just have to rely on somebody bringing that big poopy diaper to us at the time.
And then our successors will sort it out. Yeah. Just like, the house we had to balance with the objectives of a project earlier this evening. So, but does that sound okay? Like a concept of a ruin, essentially, for a form of a scenic resource. That's where I felt like we would hang it.
I'd like to see it in a list of scenic resources, maybe use the words potential scenic resource such as, and just have it be in a list as opposed to something that's, called out really super specifically for some kind of policy.
Yeah, I like that.
I agree. It's something that I value. And I think that's part of the point, of this is to identify what we value and find ways to protect it. So that doesn't bother me.
Planner Kenyon, is that completed your staff report?
Oh no, we have one more section.
Okay, all right.
I thought that Commissioner Lazar had more comments.
Let me just double check. I think I got it. I mean, the first point was like I wanted to make sure that we had an obligation to engage in tribal consultation. So if however you want to do that, but make sure it's embedded in some meaningful way. And then I do have some language I can share with you and you can decide on, but I have an example of what tribal consultation can look like. It may be too wordy. It may need to be an IP instead, and I can forward it to you as just an example. But it outlines that the tribe may request a project to be designed to avoid, minimize, or mitigate impacts. Examples include conducting a site visit with a TIPO or their designee, requiring a professional survey, etc. But I'll share that with you. I don't think we need to go over that. And we talked about tribal cultural resources and the concept of the tribal council's involvement on that and tribal ceremony sites. And I had a definition for tribal lands. It may be irrelevant since there are no lands within city limits, but there are tribal owned properties. So, to the extent that portions of Gunther Island, Indian Island are under the ownership of the Wiyot, right? Like, do we really want to say, well, that's not a reservation, so that's not tribal land, It's tribally owned land. It's not in trust, though. So, yeah. So it might be good to have a recognition of that as well as something that is valued and protected and given higher treatment. So my definition does not include that because we don't deal with that situation very often. So, but maybe something could be included that would recognize tribally owned lands within the coastal planning area.
Yeah.
Is that tricky?
I know. I'm just thinking through what that means, and that means that they're given greater scrutiny under coastal development permitting. So in the end, does that in fact coastal development permitting we have to do on not trust land, when it's not a trust land, when they just own it. So we're kind of by calling that out as particularly something we want to protect, we're like kind of regulating it more and requiring us in the Coastal Commission to have more scrutiny over those lands.
I've just been ruminating on just sort of this concern developing of sort of loving the tribes to death, giving them opportunity, but we don't want this to be interpreted at some later date as they need to consult with us, or it becomes a must on something that they wouldn't normally want to consult on, and have to build capacity because we want them to look at every little thing that they may not really want to look at every little thing. I just don't want to put pressure on them at the same time as I want to be inclusive and create opportunity.
Yeah, that seems like a more likely near-term poopy diaper.
I think that, it seems like in my experience, tribes always, even if they're given every single referral, they don't have to respond, and they often don't. I mean, depending. Or they'll just recommend inadvertent discovery language, which is already a requirement. So, I would be curious to hear from staff if they think that it might present an undue burden on the tribes, because it seems like they would always have the choice to not engage if they did not think it was important.
It depends on how we add it. If we say, tribal lands are, especially culturally significant, and they deserve greater discretionary review when you're permitting them to make sure you don't impact that, that's a problem. If we're just,
I think just to clarify, because I see where this is.
Yeah, where do you want to put that?
The thrust of it was really not to say, oh yeah, we want to make sure the tribes don't mess up their tribal lands. No, that's not my goal. It would be that when we're thinking about areas within the coastal zone, within the city's jurisdiction, that could be vulnerable to a project, lands owned by a tribe may suffer from a project that's adjacent to it. If it's not an appropriate use, or if it's, going to have an effect on the setting, So, we don't, not that we'd probably ever see it, but if somebody, there was a proposal at one point to take Woodley Island and turn it into a giant, something crazy. And that was right across the channel from, Indian Island. And that would be a terrible fit probably. So it was really in the context of giving standing to tribal-owned lands within the LUP planning area, not to further regulate them or commit them to regulation they wouldn't otherwise be.
So
sorry.
worrying about impact on them from adjacent development.
Correct.
When we were consulting with them on the general plan update in 2018, they identified some areas that were not from their lands, but were views of their lands.
Right.
Or the areas where they held their ceremonies and that kind of thing.
There's
So
like the concept of
those-
the traditional cultural properties. The
Yeah,
TCPs.
those kinds of things were incorporated into the 2040 general plan. They had the opportunity at that time to review all of the goals and policies that were tribal related, and they agreed to everything that was in the general plan at that point in time. So I'm kind of thinking that
But our general plan doesn't apply in the coastal. We're vetting the policies, right?
But what
into
I'm
the
saying,
RDP.
the policies most of the policies that we're proposing are already in the general plan for the cultural part.
Just to specify, the whole general plan applies to the coastal zone. The coastal element is the standard review for coastal development permits. But if you came in for a conditional use permit in the coastal zone, you would have to be consistent with the whole general plan. And I did talk to, we did refer this to the tribes, and so far we've gotten comments just from Blue Lake Rancheria, and those have been incorporated into this.
So yeah, I would be hesitant to put anything in here that's going to cause additional scrutiny for them or call them out specifically. And we don't want to look like we're treating them any differently on either side than we would anybody else.
Yeah. Well, I would just contextualize it in the concept of sensitivity, I guess. So some areas are going to be more sensitive to inappropriate development, and those that are associated with a tribal cultural resource or a tribal ceremonial site or tribal owned lands, those types of things that I think warrant more scrutiny and potential protection, from inappropriate development. So that's
yeah. So maybe it's like we refer all the projects to the tribes and get their feedback, not just on tribal cultural resources, but on these other things if applicable, and take that into consideration.
And especially the concept of traditional cultural properties, of collecting sites or things of that nature that, are really known only to them, but are within city limits or the planning area, I think would be relevant. Okay, well, I'm done talking. Thanks. Sorry.
Okay, next one. Scenic and visual resources. This is the last section. So this covers Coastal Act 30251, which says permanent development shall be sited and designed to protect views to and along the ocean and scenic coastal areas. So we've listed scenic resources in the city that we've talked about, natural and built, and there's a map that identifies protected views from the coastal trail and a map that identifies protected view corridors along the northern waterfront. And then the first policy talks about how we want to protect views of scenic resources from public vantage points, and we're going to hold the protected views to a higher standard of review. And then there's a policy requiring view impact analysis when we're analyzing projects. And the protected view corridors are along the streets, so they really just affect these two properties mostly at this point, or if somebody redeveloped, to ensure that future development keeps those view corridors open. The second part of 30251 talks about minimizing the alteration of natural landforms, and so we have a policy about that. And the third part talks about new development being visually compatible with the character of the surrounding area and enhancing visually degraded areas where feasible. So we've included a policy about that. We've also defined what character means to be positive character and unique character, and so that you don't have to be consistent with the character of Broadway if it's not great, And then There's an existing general plan policy that we proposed repeating in the section about maintaining Eureka's charm and integrating the new with the best of the old. And then there's other policies we're proposing about addressing appearance or visual impacts of exterior lighting, walls and fences, signage, overhead utility lines, wireless telecommunication facilities, tsunami vertical evacuation structures, rights of ways, creating gateways at the north and south entrances to the city. And I think that's it. Yeah. Any comments on that section?
Could you humor me and go back to that view corridor photo? I'm interested in the horizontal. What are we? What view are we protecting there?
The Carson Mansion.
Oh, of course. Okay, thank you.
You're walking upslope, so you can't really see it until you get to J Street, I think, and then. And it's already kind of protected by the right of way, but that area we're hoping gets redeveloped. There's those 2 underutilized parking lots there, so just to keep that in mind in the future.
All right, good stuff.
Yes, I didn't have the ability to like pull it up or share it ahead of the meeting, but I think it's interesting that we protect these corridors. I get it, coastal views are baked into the Coastal Act, and we certainly are blessed with a lot of them. But the reality is, through aggressive redevelopment in years past, much of the waterfront's commercial warehousing was removed, and through eminent domain and various other things that blocked all of those visual corridors, and was part of the historical character of the town. So it's not an unprecedented thing to have development flanking the waterfront and blocking visual resources. But I don't know that it's something that it might come in handy though, if we're trying to balance these redevelopment sites. Some of those are targeted in the housing element, right? So.
Yeah, and we're proposing this. If you have a different thought on it, this is not something that's in our existing LCP. But I know one of our vision statements was, promoting our connection to the waterfront. And a lot of people, it's frustrating. People driving through Eureka they're right next to the bay. And most of Eureka, you don't get to see the bay from, all these people don't understand. So view corridors are one that's like visual access to the bay. That's a type of public access that we at least can maintain on our northern waterfront because we have these street grids that allow for it now that those warehouses are gone.
And I think you're right that the citizenry has been pretty clear that they want that.
I just wouldn't want to see a project, going through gyrations to preserve a view shed, when maybe a better project would be to just forfeit that view shed, in the future, and not, get hung up on it. But I don't know whether.
I think, for the waterfront sites, they're big blocks, you can do a lot with the space between the view shed arrows, and also it'd probably be good to break up the massing. I'm trying to think of a huge building that would span, that space.
And you can have buildings with holes in them.
Buildings with holes.
Glass walkways.
There you go. I think it would probably just lend itself to interestingly designed architecture, and I'm hoping, if they are developed with, housing, that they will be attractive and the massing will be broken up, and they won't be just enormous Soviet block apartments on our beautiful waterfront. So, I think this will actually probably help encourage good design, would be my guess, but it's difficult to know.
I was listening to the Sarah Bareilles concert and sitting in Halverson Park, seeing the library and the Carson Mansion and the pink and the marina. It was just beautiful. It was just a gorgeous day, but it just struck me how beautiful it is down there.
Okay. Oh, yeah. The last thing I just wanted to touch on was the public access maps and bicycle map, if you guys had any thoughts on those. You can click out of my PowerPoint, Kristen. I'm done with it.
Can you repeat that? What you wanted input on the bicycle map, did you say?
The bicycle maps and the public access and recreation maps that we provided this time. If there was any specific comments on those.
Were the water trails included? Was there language about the water trails
Oh,
as well as bike trails? I don't think I didn't get that far in my review. So
no, there's the maps just show where the boating facilities are, but they don't. There's nowhere where we mention that there's water trails. So that could be something to add to the language in the public access section.
you can get all that information, the water trails map, from the Harbor District or Redwood Community Action Agency.
All right, and then you're free to send me emails or anything, and we'll bring this back to you.
I did have a question about this. Not so much the maps, but more just the status of the bike plan that is on the horizon.
Right. It's an unfortunate series of events that the LCP update is coming ahead of the bike plan, because the bike plan is going to get all this great input on where bike facilities should be from the public. But I believe that the Coastal Commission is going to want to see a bike facilities map in the LUP. So this is not as we're going to have to come back to it and fix it to make it consistent with the bike plan, unfortunately, because of the series of how things are going.
Well, depending on how long it takes for the Coastal Commission to review your first submittal, maybe the timelines will merge and it will all just work out beautifully.
Bite your tongue, please.
I know, sorry. One somewhat silly thing is in the figure 3-4, you'll want to probably update the naming of 2030 Park.
Oh, yeah.
So next time you have the maps generated.
Thank you.
I'm not looking for a report on this now, but I also would like to see what the synchrony might be with these updates with the Greenways and Gulches ordinance.
Yeah. So the Greenways and Gulches ordinance was planning to be coming back to you after the summer, but then the LCP started to take priority. So the Greenways and Gulches ordinance will come back to you once we get this planning effort done.
That's what keeps happening to that ordinance.
So I noticed there's I don't know if you'd call it it's not a lateral, vertical access to the waterfront trail from Broadway through the balloon track?
Yes.
What's the story there?
That's future proposed trail. So when that site redevelops, we expect a public access way through it.
Are there any other exciting future trails that are maybe not on the public or our radar? I mean, I'm looking at the map, but it's...
There's the one by Blue Ox.
Yeah, the Blue Ox one is another one when that site redevelops. That's actually an existing city right-of-way that goes up that way. We have right-of-way there, but...
And I see the Beta Zoo Trail, or at least the northern portions of it.
And one through the gulch behind HCOE by Cooper Gulch.
Right. Oh, you mean when I do that on my bike, I'm not technically allowed?
And our Public Works Department's working on a sea level rise adaptation planning CIP report that is going to hopefully be public in December or January. And they're proposing, setting back and creating new, utility and access corridors. And so that's something that's not fully captured here, because it feels like it's not something we're proposing now, but I think in our sea level rise chapter we'll talk about that. That's it.
Much for that report and for working with us on all the input that we have for you around this. It's lovely to have such expertise on the Planning Commission. Let us move then to item J, other reports and communications. Are there any?
I actually had another part of my director's report for you.
Okay, please.
So just wanted to share with you that you've met our newest assistant planner this evening. We also have 2 other new employees that have just joined us at the beginning of this month. We have a new associate planner, Aubrey Richardson. She comes to us from the city of Fresno. She went to Humboldt State. And then Leanna Smith is our new temporary planning technician. She's also a Humboldt State student, and I anticipate at some point in the future that they will be before you doing your presentations.
Any other? Okay, seeing none, can I say the A word? Adjournment?